I will talk about BDS in the Christian world. The BDS in the Christian world is defined as an act of love, as a Christian response to the occupation, which is considered a sin against God and humanity. In order to understand how the BDS is defined in Christian theology, I would first start with a few words on Palestinian liberation theology, in which the BDS, the Christian BDS is rooted, for then discussing the theological elaboration of the Christian BDS movement and defining the Christian BDS network. Liberation theologies have developed in the late 60s in a time in which churches opened up to new ideas such as human rights, justice, equality, and they were meant to re-signify the Christian message for the oppressed under tyrannical regimes such as in Southern America, under racial discrimination, above all in Northern America. Then they gained momentum in the anti-apartheid struggle. As we heard yesterday, Desmond Tutu is one of the leading figures, and then they have been contextualized in different parts of the world, including the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In general, liberation theologies combine neo-Marxist theories with Christian thought. Then they see power as inherently oppressive, that leads to economic exploitation, racial discrimination, and cultural marginalization, while justice is intrinsically connected to resistance. From a Christian perspective, in order to re-signify the Bible, Jesus becomes the leader of the oppressed, while there is a duty upon Christians to resist injustice and become witness of justice, and this is the reconceptualization of martyrdom. Palestinian theology is one contextualized version of liberation theologies, and it is liberationist insofar as it is anti-Zionist, advocating for the liberation from the Zionist occupation. It is contextual insofar as it advances a nationalistic message, and it has also anti-Judaic elements in that it advocates the replacement of the biblical narrative with the Palestinian narrative. The call to boycott and divest from Israel was formulated in the Theological Political Manifesto of Palestinian Liberation Theology, which is the Kairos Palestine document in 2009, which is the result of previous efforts to theologically define the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, such as the 2007 Amman Call, which paved the way for the definition of the occupation as a sin, the 2009 Bern perspective, which calls upon Christians to reread the Bible through Palestinian eyes, and then created a global Kairos movement in 2011. The theology behind the Christian BDS is rooted in two main ideas: the empire and resistance. The empire is considered as any form of power that, by being inherently oppressive, leads to violence and occupation, while resistance as a duty of Christians must respect the commandment of loving thy enemy, therefore must foster non-violent forms of struggle against injustice. How do theologians define the empire? As I said, there is a global Kairos movement with several contributors from different parts of the world. The empire is defined as forms of neo-imperialism, and here we have Indian contributors and African contributors. They may be theologians or priests or activists, and they define neo-imperialism as any project that aims at the oppression of peoples living in the developing world. Zionism is considered as a form of imperialism in that its goal is to oppress the Palestinian people. The empire is also accused of misinterpreting Islam in order to promote new crusades, and in this sense, Zionism is considered the major contributor of this misinterpretation and therefore inherently anti-Arab. Finally, the empire is accused of fostering military actions and constant violence, and in this sense Zionism is again theologically conceived as a form of empire in that it supposedly promotes the systematic violation of international law and human rights. But it's the narrative of the occupation that plays a major role in the theology behind the BDS. As I said, the occupation in theological terms is defined as a sin against God and humanity, which leads to evil acts rooted in the perversion of the scriptures. Why is there a Zionist occupation? The Zionist occupation is the result of a militaristic reading and interpretation of the Bible based on a primitive idea of God, as opposed to the idea of a God of peace and a God of justice of the New Testament. Then we have the use of the narrative of the occupation in historical terms. And here we have several authors, mainly one, Mitri Raheb, from Bethlehem, who uses the word Palestine in a meta-historical way. Palestine becomes a general concept which defines the area, a geographical area under constant occupation from biblical times up to nowadays. And this obviously has the goal of delegitimizing the whole Zionist presence, the Jewish presence and the whole Zionist project, because Zionism is associated with other foreign occupiers such as the Romans or the Assyrians. In promoting the BDS in a theological way, through Christian thought, theologians and activists face many challenges. First of all, a Jewish Bible. Secondly, a Jewish reality on the ground. And third, they have to foster ways of struggling against the Zionist empire, respecting non-violence. How do they do this? Through the contextualization of the Bible and the replacement of the biblical narrative with the Palestinian narrative, mainly focusing on three topics: the land, justice, and resistance. The narrative and the discourse on the land has always the aim of delegitimizing any claim, any Jewish claim on the land of Israel, and the continuity of the attachment of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. They say that Zionism is a product of Jewish particularism and of a nationalistic interpretation of the Bible, which is rooted in a primitive and tribal conceptualization of God, as opposed to the universalist message of the New Testament. One of the main biblical sources that are often used is the history of Naboth vineyards, a history of dispossession, an evil king that dispossesses Naboth of his vineyards and is eventually punished by God. And here, the evil king becomes the Zionists who dispossess the Jewish people, the Palestinian people, of the land. Naboth, Jewish, becomes the Palestinian people. Secondly, we have an ongoing discourse on economic justice and a new interpretation of the Bible, above all of the prophets and mainly of Amos, as a constant struggle between the rich and the poor, and the call of the prophets to stand up against the injustice of the rich, whereby the rich is the Zionist occupier and the poor is the Palestinian people, but also of the New Testament, and in particular the Gospel of Mark. And here, the new reading of the Gospel results in a portrayal of Jesus as the leader of the poor fishermen, whose economic development is hindered by the Romans, by the Roman Empire. And again, we have the association of the Romans with the Zionists, and the local population, which is Jewish, becomes the Palestinian people. Finally, the call to resist the empire, to struggle against the empire. Here, again, Jesus becomes a rebel against the Romans, the foreign occupiers, therefore the Zionists, and Jesus becomes a rebel against also the Jewish establishment that cooperated with the Roman Empire at the time. And here, the Jewish establishment of the time becomes all of those part of the Jewish world which supports Israel and Zionism. There are several biblical references, mainly the letters of Paul. Now, in this frame, the boycott of Israel and the divestment from Israel becomes a Christian response to the occupation, a Christian response to injustice, which is non-violent, therefore it respects the commandment of loving thy enemy, the Zionists. It becomes an act of love, and it becomes the way in which Christians can stand up against injustice and becoming witness of justice, mobilizing masses. And the message here is far-reaching, because the liberation of Palestine has an eschatological message, because it also implies the liberation of the misreading or supposedly misreadings of the Bible. The Christian BDS has spread throughout the Christian world, mainly in the Protestant world, but also in the Catholic world. It's different because of the structures of the Protestant world and the Catholic on Catholic Christianity. Catholic world is very hierarchical, so there are no initiatives within the Catholic Church, but many BDS initiatives in Catholic organizations. We will hear in the next presentation about the Presbyterian Church, but several other churches, the United Methodist Church, other international, interdenominational associations such as Kairos Europa, for example, in Europe, working mainly in the German-speaking world, Pax Christi, and others. If we want to trace back the first BDS initiatives, we can see that they started in 2004 in the Presbyterian Church and the Methodist Church, with the first initiatives calling upon the US government to end military aid to Israel. And then they developed and increased after the 2005 BDS call by Palestinian grassroots and civil society organizations, after 2009 and the adoption of the Kairos Palestine document, and several and other historical events. It spread, for example, in the United Church of Canada, United Church of Christ in the US, and other Catholic organizations that I've mentioned. If we analyze the discussions within the churches and within the associations about BDS initiatives, we see that these discussions are focused on three main recurrent topics: the land, violence, and prophecy. Again, the land the discussion about the land of Israel and the promised land, the idea of promised land, plays a major role in promoting BDS initiatives. The churches and the Christian associations always try to distinguish between biblical Israel and the modern state of Israel, in a thorough discussion that aims at dismissing the continuity of the attachment to the land, while other churches, and in particular the Church of Scotland, go beyond and define the promised land as an inheritance, not as an entitlement, as an inheritance of all the peoples that live in it, therefore delegitimizing the idea of a nation state in the area. Second, the question of violence. The BDS movement is advanced in these discussions and approved and adopted because it is a non-violent movement, supposedly non-violent movement, that opposes violence. The condemnation of violence in the churches and in the Christian, other Christian associations that have adopted the BDS is very general. And it always ends up condoning Palestinian violence, which is either associated with Israeli military actions or considered as an act of despair. Therefore, the BDS has a prophetic meaning, has a prophetic message that brings hope and justice to a people under oppression, being then a Christian response to a situation of injustice. If we want to try to define the network of the Christian BDS, we see that several of the BDS initiatives are advanced by solidarity groups within the churches or within the organizations that are often linked and connected to international, interdenominational Christian organizations, such as the World Council of Churches, which runs a program called the Ecumenical Accompaniment Program in Palestine and Israel, attracting volunteers from all over the world that spend a certain time volunteering in several projects in Palestinian territories and then go back to their own churches and denominations. Several times we see also a connection with certain NGOs, Christian NGOs and Israeli NGOs. BDS initiatives are advanced with certain arguments based on reports and publications of several NGOs, mainly B'Tselem and the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. Or we have another way that BDS initiatives are advanced through church leaders that are active in certain committees within the churches or the associations, such as ethical investment committees or interfaith dialogue committees. Either way, the solidarity groups linked to certain organizations or church leaders are all connected to Palestinian Liberation Theology centers that spread the Palestinian liberation theology and the idea of the necessity to foster BDS initiatives in order to support Christians in the Middle East. I'm finished, yeah. Palestinian Liberation Theology centers are mainly located in Jerusalem and in Bethlehem. Several of them are ecumenical, others are connected to certain churches, both Catholic and Protestant. A final remark about the BDS in general and specifically about the Christian BDS. We often hear the question about the effectiveness of the BDS movement. Is the BDS effective or not? In my opinion, the question about the effectiveness of the BDS in terms of damaging Israel's economy or finance is misleading. It may be effective, may not be effective, but the real danger of the BDS, and in particular of the Christian BDS, is the narrative that it advances. And in particular, the Christian BDS narrative has anti-Judaic elements that are rooted in a replacement theological narrative that actually jeopardizes all the step forwards that the Christian-Jewish dialogue has done over the last 40 years. So the actual question is, what is the place that Israel, Zionism, and Judaism will have in future in Christian thought? Thank you.